Hello and welcome to the 30th video in this series of programming Chess Engine in C. So in this video we're going to start generating and adding some moves to the move list, and I'll try and keep it as short as possible. We're going to generate today just the white pawn moves in a given position. The first thing I've done is I've added already to io.c print move list function, which should be completely explanatory as to exactly what it's doing. It's simply taking in a pointer to a move list, walking through each move in that move list, and printing the move and the score to the screen, because when we come to the end of this video we'll print out a move list we've generated. So, on to thinking about generating the moves. The first thing we're going to need a couple of little macros that we're going to put at the top of our move generation file, and you can download the code anywhere and copy and paste these in. The first one is actually creating a move integer from the from to square, the captured piece, promoted piece and the flag. And this should be familiar why and how we're doing this from a couple of videos ago, where we in the main function played around with building a move together, shifting the bits left the appropriate amount to store them all inside one integer. So although it's in a macro, there's no difference between this and what we were doing in a couple of videos ago when we were looking at how a move is put together. The next one here is a macro called square off board. And it's simply saying, is the square but inside a macro off board or not that we're looking at. Now we already have in validate.c a square on board function, but I'd rather not have a function call each time for this at the moment. It's okay in an assert, but here we really don't need it. It's quicker just to have a macro in here that will then, when I use square off board, substitute it with this code here. Okay, so white pawn moves. What's to think about there? Well, very quickly, a pawn moves forward usually one square. So moving forward one square, as you can see from the indexing here, gives a +10. They capture diagonally, which is a +9 or a +11, and if they're on the second rank they can jump forward 2 squares, which is a +20. If they're on the 7th rank and move to the 8th, they promote, so they generate, instead of 1, 4 moves, because they can promote to a queen, a rook, a knight or a bishop. And as a test position at the end of this video, I'll be using this position here, so we should expect to see the moves a2 to a3 and to a4 2 squares, b4 b5 and b4 capturing on c5. d3 won't be able to move, it's blocked and has no captures. We'll have c2 and c4, we'll have c3 and c4, e3 and pawn to e4. Pawn on f5 will be able to go to f6 but also capture on e6 because that's an en passant square. The pawn on h3 can only move to h4 because it's left the second rank, and the pawn on g7 should be able to capture on f8, promoting to 4 different piece types, capture on h8, promoting to 4 different piece types, and move one square forwards to g8 because it's empty, again promoting to 4 different piece types. So let's have a look how we do that, and that's the reason I've started with pawns, is because it tends to be the most complicated of them all. In fact, because of the promotions, we actually need to add in a couple of in-between functions, which look very, very similar. One of them is called add white pawn capture move. And the reason we have this, instead of directly calling add a capture move, is because we need to know whether the pawn has moved from the 7th rank. As I explained here, on the 7th rank means it's going to the 8th, so it's promoting. And if so, we're taking into this function here arguments of the from square, the to square and the captured piece. We need to build our move using the captured piece, but using a white queen, a white rook, a white bishop and a white knight as the promote pieces that the pawn is promoting to. And if it's not on the 7th rank, then it's not promoting, which means the promotion piece is empty, and we call add capture move. So these pawn move functions here are sort of an in-between function between the 3 that actually add the move onto the board, like so. And similarly, I've got another function called add white pawn move, which does exactly the same thing, tests for the rank, but simply here doesn't have a piece that's being captured, so it's got empty here. Now, I could combine all this together in a slightly more efficient way, but I thought it's better to split everything out like this so it's quite clear. Okay, so now we can move on to generating the moves, and the first thing to do is copy in some variables as always at the start of our generation function. I've cleared all of the other code out already, I've generated all moves. we'll assert the board's OK, set the count to 0 in the move list, set up some variables here, and get on with generating our pawn moves. Now, I've copied quite a bit of code in here, but I'm going to delete some of it then so that I can talk through it step by step of exactly what's going on. We say if the side to move is white, because we've set side equal to position side, what we want to do is loop through each of our white pawns on the board. So the first thing we do is set up a main loop, looping through from 0 up to 1 less than the total number of white pawns on the board using the piece_num variable in our position. Because remember, everything in an array is 0 indexed. So if it says we have 8 pawns, we'll loop from 0 to 7. And then we need, for each one of our pawns, to find out what square it's on. And we get that simply from the piece list, if you remember, which is indexed by piece type. And then we say which piece number, so which pawn, so this first pawn, the second pawn, and so on, we're wanting to look at, and that'll give us the square. And the only thing we really should do here is we should assert that the square it's giving us for that piece is on the board, because if the piece is off the board, then something has gone terribly wrong somewhere, and we're going to be generating foul moves. So that should be fairly clear what we've done here. We loop through each white pawn, and for each one we get from our piece list the square that it's sitting on. The next thing to do is generate the moves, the non-capture moves, where the pawn simply moves forward. And you remember that if they're on the second rank, they can jump forward. If both squares in front are empty, it can jump forward 2 squares as well as 1. But to move forwards, the square has to be empty. And when we move forward plus 10, remember, for a white. So we're going to say here, if the piece array at our square pawns on plus 10 is empty, then add a white pawn move from square to square plus 10. Fairly simple. And then inside this add white pawn move, we deal with the promotions in case we were on the 7th rank. So we know the square in front of the pawn is empty, which means if the pawn is on the 2nd rank and the square at plus 20, so 2 squares in front, is also empty, then we know we can add a quiet move already, because there's no promotion because we're starting from the 2nd rank, from square to square plus 20, no captured piece, no promoted piece, but we do have to set the flag, which is why we've got it here, for a pawn start. Fairly simple. The next two are to look at generating the captures. Now I've said that the captures go in a +9, you remember, or a +11 direction. So here 45 to 54 or 45 to 56, a diagonal direction. And here we want to do 2 things. One, we have to say, is the piece colour of the piece that's at square +9 black? If it is, we can generate a capture, but we have to be careful here, because remember, +9 could also be off board. So we actually have to first of all say, okay, is it not square off board? Which means, is the square, and there's a little bug there already, I need a +9 and a +11, that we're capturing on, off board or not? Because if that square's already off board, then we don't need to evaluate the rest of this. We can't be generating a move. But if the square is on the board, so not off board, and the colour at +9, square +9 is black, then we can add a white pawn capture move. And we do exactly the same thing in the +11 direction, the other diagonal direction. And the only thing that remains now is to generate the en passant captures, and they're very similar to above, except we just use the add capture move because we can't be promoting when we're capturing onto the 6th rank. And here we don't need any off-board stuff. We can simply say, is the square +9, so diagonally in one direction, our en passant square? If so, add a capture. Or is the square +11 in the other diagonal direction en passant? If so, then add a capture. And that's all there is to it for generating the white pawn moves. So the only other thing we need to do now, I think we've got everything in. I just want to check in defs.h that I didn't miss any function that was supposed to be added. We've got print move list added, generate all moves should already be added if it's not, as an external function here. And now we can go to vice.c and have a look. And I'll just delete the code that I've already got in here. Now I've got this FEN here, so position, from arena here, this very position here, to which you can copy and paste in if you've downloaded the code, called pawn moves. And now what I want to do is actually set the board up with this. So the first thing I'll do is set the board up in our standard manner. Let's declare a one-sized array with our board. I'm then going to send a pointer into this board with the pawn moves FEN here to set it up and print the board to the screen. And the next thing I'm going to do is create a move list, send that move list into our generate moves function and print the move list. But firstly, I'm going to make this and close my eyes and hope it builds, and it does build. Good. Because believe it or not, this must be the 9th or 10th time I've done this video with the amount of problems I've had with it. And assuming you've got all the code copied in there, we can now run and see what kind of moves are generated. Well, it says it's generated 26 moves on the list, which is a good start. And we'll bring up the chess position here and walk through what we've got. So we've got A2, A3 and A2, A4, so that's correct. C2, C3 and C2, C4, it's also correct. E2, E3, E2, E4 is correct. H3, H4 is correct. We've got B4 to B5 is correct. B4 capturing C5 is correct. D4 to D5 is correct. D4 capturing C5, D4 capturing E5 is correct. F5 to F6 is correct. F5 capturing en passant E6, good, that's correct. And now the last pawn, the G8 pawn, we've got it promoting to queen, to rook, to bishop, to knight on G8, also on F8 and also on H8. Good, so that looks like the white pawn generation, at the very least, is functioning, and you can see the position printed out here. Okay, that's it for this video then. In the next video I'll flip that and generate the pawn moves for black, so it'll be a shorter and quicker video, but let's do this move generation because it's important step by step. Thanks very much for listening. Comments, questions, criticisms welcome as always on YouTube.